And let's see, I got a chat there. Um, uh, just to remind you about that, you would need to do the meta tag in order to change the way things are presented. That's what this is all about, this adaptive layout. How do we present things differently when it shows up on a different screen? Specifically, that is important nowadays because so many people are interacting with systems in the cloud with their mobile phone devices. And mobile phone devices nowadays are so powerful. They got processors in them that can rival the computers that we had just a few years ago. So they're very powerful. You've got this very powerful device in your hand. Why not use it? And so, of course, everybody is. And they want to do their business with their phone. They don't want to be tied down to a laptop even or a desktop. And so that's becoming possible. But what we can do, which is kind of clever in HTML and CSS, is we can actually detect when the screen size changes, and that we can do with this viewport in the meta tag, and we set the initial scale, and then with the app media command, accessing the screen, and then using max width and min width, we can so see what happens with this media command. We open up a curly brace, and then everything inside that curly brace, that's like we were doing a new style section. So this is like a whole new style section, but it's a whole new style section only when it's like a if then else kind of thing, I suppose you could say. If the maximum width of our viewport of the screen is 600 pix, in other words, if we have a small width, less than 600 pix, then we're going to have this new lot of CSS. So what we see inside the app media command is a whole bunch of CSS, which is specific to that particular uh, width of the screen. And so that's why we've got a few things happening here. Firstly, you might notice a pattern. We start with the skinniest screen or the smallest screen, and we work our way up to the biggest screen because the way these things work is in kind of a sequence, right? This is going to happen first. So if we've got a small screen, then we'll apply this, and the other stuff won't even be checked. All right. But if we've got a larger screen, it'll test this, fail, and finally it'll get to the one where it does the application. And these are like a bunch of if then else's, right? If the screen is this wide, do this. Otherwise, if it's between these two widths, do this stuff. Otherwise, if it's between these things, do this stuff. Otherwise, if it's between those things, do that stuff. And lastly, if it's none of those things, do this stuff. And so we end up, and all kinds of things you could do. You could change the colors, change the fonts, change all kinds of things. One of the things here we're doing is changing the what we changed the width of divs inside of it, and so that changed the way that things were presented. Now, specifically for Lab 8, what you have to do there is you've got a situation where you've got and I was just talking to a student about this a minute ago. You got a situation in the original document where an image is shown to the left of a bunch of text. Now that image is in its own div, and the bunch of text is in its own div. And those two divs are both inside another container div. And then there's a grid clear at the end. So what you'll find is all of those we've got some things happening with them. Maybe the text is aligned to the left or something like that. Not sure on those, but if we get a small screen, what we want to do is we want to take that image and put it up on top. Now, when you look at that and analyze it, what that actually means is the image is taking up the entire width of the screen. So if you look at the original CSS, you'll see that the image is taking up maybe 25% of the screen or 20% of the screen. And that's set in the CSS with the width. You'll see the CSS for the image for the div that holds the image, the width is set to 20% of the container in which it sits. And then the width of the text beside it is maybe 80%, or if it's not percents, maybe it's in pics, 200 pics and 800 pics, whatever. But what we'll do now is we'll say, oh, well, instead, when we have a narrow screen, we're going to make that image take up the entire width of the screen. And so it'll be some number much more than 20% or 200. And so that's the kind of change that you need to do to get the image to sit on top of the text. What's actually happening is the text is floating to the left, right, and the image is floating to the left. And so how this works in the HTML is the image comes down first and then the text comes down beside it. And if they add up to less than 100% of the div in which they sit, then they sit one beside the other. But if they don't, if they add up to more than 100%, then one will sit on top of the other. All we'd have to do is actually change the image to be so that the two numbers add up to more than 100% of the container in which they sit. Then they will sit on top of each other. I hope I've made that clear, but I think that's kind of what you need to know to sort of get that Lab 8 to work. And so the answer to Lab 8 is really found in the CSS for Lab 9. All you'll need to do is take one of those media things, take your meta tag. The meta tag will be unchanged. Make sure you don't put the meta tag inside the style. It goes straight under the head. And your media command does go inside the style. And you're going to take one of those media things and you'll set it up so that you're going to have two different versions of it, right? Small screen and big screen. Whereas in uh, Lab 9, we've got more than two different versions. We've got like 5 or 6 different versions because with various widths of screens. I think you only need 2 widths of screens for Lab 8. So Lab 8's going to end up with 2 media commands, I think. Anyways, that's what I'm thinking I probably needed to say to you. Now, is there anybody how are we going with that? Maybe some of you have already finished and you found that. I don't know. So what do you think, students? We okay? We good with that?
Hello, sir.
Uh,
Hello.
hello. How are you?
Yeah, how are you? Good,
Alhamdulillah.
fine. How are you?
Good, good.
Alhamdulillah. I did lab 8, and when the screen is small, the pictures is in right position. But when I make it a bigger, they are flying, like they're every picture in another side. I
Uh-huh.
don't know what is the problem.
So when you change the size of the pictures, how are you changing the size of the pictures? Are you doing that with the CSS?
Yeah, I did, but yeah, I finished lab 8 for the product list.
Have you
But
have
when
you
I make
uh, when you
sorry,
make
when
okay,
when
so there's 3 pages and it works for some oh right. The product
so
list
for
has a lot of images, right? There's like 3
yeah
columns goes down to 2 columns. Yeah. So that one, 3
when
columns going down to 2 columns, you'll have to change it from I think like 28% to 43% or something like that. Um, so yeah, but I mean, the main thing that you're going to be changing, and where I would be looking for my errors in that, is in these width percents. So if we look at it here, you can see this in my screen. I hope my screen is still showing, isn't it? I hope.
yeah yes
So this is what I mean. If you look at this, you can see if you want to have on your screen only one thing wide, then you'll use the numbers like this. This is only going to allow it to be 1 wide. This column is only going to be 1 wide because it takes up 93% of the width of the container in which it sits with a little bit of margin. If you see a number like this, 43% and 2, that means that we're going to have 2 wide. So you could use these numbers in the product list where we're changing it from 3 wide to 2 wide. 3 wide is actually, there's an example of 3 wide here too, I think, the 26%. This one would give us 3 columns on the screen. All right. And this one gives us 2. This gives us two images inside a column, two. Okay, this gives us one image inside a column. So, I mean, really, that's why I gave you Lab 9 to look at. It really, I think, is such a good example of what to do. So you can see this just by looking at the numbers. Three columns wide in the screen. Each column has one image. Here's another one, three columns wide in the screen, but this one, each column has two images wide. Now, what you need to do in Lab 8, two columns wide, one image. Two columns wide would be something like this. Your column will be two, so you use numbers like that, and one image inside of it, you could use something like that. 90%, 20%. Now all of them are floating to the left. Uh, the only way you're going to get your columns to line up one beside the other is to do this float to the left. So the one that comes first goes on the left side, the one that comes next goes on beside it. But they're all going as far as they can to the left. And then you need to have that grid clear at the bottom. I hope that helps. I'm
It's
just
it's all it's all right when the size of the page is small, but when I make it large,
mhm.
it change everything.
So when you say the side, are you talking about the width of the page also? Yeah, you are, right?
Yeah,
So
I mean the page when I make the
so
page big,
So I
it's
would look at
become
your, I would look then at this part of it. Have you got these things right? What about the
yeah,
numbers?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
I did
So,
it all.
so do you have more than one lot of these commands? You should have some. See how this one works is we say, okay, if it's small, we do this, but if it's big, you must have at least two sets of media commands, or if you didn't have, you know what I mean? So here we're saying if it didn't do any of the things above, so in other words, if it wasn't small, then we do this. Have you got, so maybe that's the thing that you're missing is what happens when the min width. Have you got a min width in there anywhere? You need to have one command which is just at screen with min width, and that's going to be your big size. Because you'll notice that the small size is using a max width. Small size, max width, big size, min width. And yeah, I hope that helps out. So focus on those things. Um, what is the command that that's what I'd say to you specifically, who was speaking to me saying that you had the problem. Okay,
Okay, thank you.
all right. Was that Amani, was it? Yeah. Um, any others questions on that? I hope that helps.